Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in here at Joyful Noise Productions. Once again, I am Joe, your humble host here, and today we're going to start off with a rant. But before we go any further, please do me a favor. Like this video, share it to all your friends, and subscribe so that way you can get the notifications whenever I drop a new video here on this channel. So let's get into it. Now, as some of us as musicians, especially when I was growing up, a lot of us always thought the way to go to rock stardom or to get the hit record that gets us played on the radio was to slave it out, to create a big following, and to be able to garner some record sales to be able to be noticed. Because we knew back in the days, especially in the 70s and the early and mid 80s, even some bit of the late 80s and early 90s, where if you were able to kind of get a drawing of people to like your music and to be able to purchase your music wherever it was sold, you were able to find yourself on the radar of a lot of record companies. They would send their artist relations or A&R people to go look for you. They would listen to your music. And that's how normally the way it was always been done. And that's why you had great music that came out back in the day. You know, we think of the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, we think about Tom Petty, we think about even earlier stars like even of Quiet Riot, you know, and then eventually we got others such as, you know, Hootie and the Blowfish. We also had rap stars like NWA, Tupac, all those guys. The reason why is because there were scouts looking out for them because they put out their craft and they were able to produce the best music that was possible. Now we've all heard the rants, we've all seen the videos of why music sucked. And it's true. You know, some people think, well, it sucks because you don't like what's out there. And when I began to watch this video done by Rick Beato and an insider by the name of Jim Barber, it really made me like, whoa, it's deeper than we think it is. So when I engaged in the whole video, I was like, wow, this is bad. That's why a lot of people, they always poke fun at Maroon 5. They always poke fun at Taylor Swift. They always poke fun at Nickelback. You're probably thinking, why? One thing I've learned is that the music industry has always been the tyrant. It's always been the one thing that people had to go through. So they became known as the gatekeepers. Companies would determine who would succeed and who would fail. If you really did some history back in the days of actual music DJs, you would come across this one word that was always kind of used a lot. And what is that? Payola. In just kind of a brief history of what payola was, record companies would literally pay DJs to play a certain song on the radio. Eventually, after some time, it became illegal, but then record companies still found a way to get around it. When FM came around, a lot of times they would put all the good songs on the A side and whatever was left on the B side, what they call them. That's why you had the term back in the day known as B-sides. Record DJs didn't always play by those rules. And because they didn't always play by those rules, that's why you had certain songs that didn't belong. Like, I'm gonna give you an example of an album that I have. One of the albums let me talk about is called The Pretenders #2. On the first side, it had the thing known as The Talk of the Town. But also, it had on the B side, which was another famous song, which is called Tattoo Love Boys. And because DJs felt, you know what, this song sounds pretty good too, let's throw that on the air. You've had an explosion of FM where people were able to hear songs that they liked. You thought about old DJs like Jim Ladd, Cynthia Fox, you know, Paraquat Kelly, Jim Frazier, all those guys. The reason why they went that route, because they wanted to play music that they adored. Came, and as time began to go around, all of a sudden, the music began to change for some whatever weird reason. Based on the video that I heard with Rick Beato, I've heard about this law, but I didn't realize how much of an effect it had. It was known as the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That means record companies were able to be, in so many words, in control of the music. Before, when you thought about all the music that was being played, it was under a lot of scrutiny, thanks to Tipper Gore, Well, anyways, yet because of the Telecommunications Act, it put radio companies in charge of radio stations. So it allowed these companies to buy up all these radio stations. So what it actually did was it took the power away from the DJ. So the DJ can no longer determine or figure out what song will work on the radio. And even I remember one time Jim Ladd even talked about this on his farewell show on a talk radio show, which is conservative, but yet couldn't do it on the one famous radio station he was very known for being at. He said when 1996 came around, you have what they call radio consultants. And radio consultants were the death of radio. That's why sometimes when you listen to the radio, sometimes they'll throw in some classics and stuff like that. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I get burned out of hearing the same old classic over and over again. In order to keep the people's interest in listening to the radio, they had to throw those classics in there. Because, oh yeah, I remember that song. That was the effect of why that was supposed to be. If you watch the Rick Beato video with Jim Barber, it was like, wow. I mean, you're talking about a really, really controlled consensus of all that. And that's also contributed to high record prices, and also the reason why the music was coming out the way it was coming out. That's why people would say your music sucked. When the 90s came out, I was like, okay, Nirvana's cool, but also I fell in love with bands like Stone Temple Pilots and Alice in Chains. The reason why I fell in love with them eventually because of the fact that they were different from most 90s bands that were coming out, at the time. Not to say that there was not good bands, because there were some good bands that came out, and some of them flew under the radar. Smashing Pumpkins was obviously one of the better bands that came out of the 90s that was alternative rock. The one thing that the record companies have always wanted, they've always wanted to have a monopoly over the music, and they wanted to dictate to people what they wanted them to hear. Well, one thing changed it all: the internet. And what began the death knell of what has been going on today as far as what the music is concerned? Napster. We all know, I don't know if any of you have grew up in that time, 1999, where Napster, and also I remember one I was under, it was called Grokster. It was a music sharing file site where you can share all sorts of different music and things like that. Obviously, guys like Metallica got involved in this fight because, understandably, it was stealing from them, and it was hard for them to make their money. However, they didn't realize that record companies were doing everything they can to try to gobble up as much money as possible without them having to put into it. That's why a lot of rock bands, a lot of music acts have to go on tour, because that's where they make the bulk of their money. That includes the ticket sales. It also includes merchandise. This is why a lot of people, or a lot of bands get tired. Or a lot of music acts, they become like, oh man, I have to go on tour again. I have to do all this to recoup my money. It's because the music industry is not looking out for the artist. They're looking out to get paid. That's why even has been mentioned by Warren Hewart and even by Glenn Fricker that all these music producers, all these record execs, they're very few in number. This is why they want to keep it narrow, and this is why sometimes you always have the same sounds. Now, sadly, even to go into my world a little bit, even contemporary Christian music has also fell into that category as well. That's why I noticed that there's songs and artists that are coming up that are like, well, these guys sound almost like this guy. or they have the same type of feel, or they sound the same exact way. It's because of the monopoly that the music industry is taking hold of. Now they're probably thinking, well, what does CCM or contemporary Christian music have to do with this? Did you know that back in the early 80s, that Christian music was outselling secular music? If you don't believe me, explain the existence of Amy Grant. Because of the music that's been trying to be conglomerized, it did some damage to the music industry like nothing else. That's why people make fun of certain bands. That's why sometimes people are not too thrilled about the newest music that comes out. Because now they become what they call a factory. They're just producing clones of the biggest thing right now. Now, as I alluded to earlier, the internet changed it all. And the one thing that's good about the internet is that the internet allowed for artists to become independent, and it allowed them to be able to get their music heard through unconventional norms. The invention of internet radio, that's one of the things that has kept the individual artists going. And also through social media. And you also have sites like YouTube that also pushes out certain types of music. You have streaming sites like Spotify, or you have certain types of internet radios or these rogue radio stations that if they love your music, they're going to put it up there. And I myself have become, as far as my band, has had a few shots of being on internet radio, and we have been played very often. When it comes to today's music, you need to understand, it's not because the artists are incapable, they're just being puppets for a bigger puppet master. And once they're done with that puppet, guess what? They'll find another one. Is it the end? Maybe for commercial use, or maybe commercially, yes. Being independent and being on the internet, no. Let's take another example. Joe Bonamassa. Nobody played his music on the radio, but guess what? He became an internet sensation with his music. And another one, DJ Khaled. He became a sensation through the internet. Even though the music industry is doing everything it can to try to hold on to whatever little it has, it's still unsuccessful. Why? Because the artist will always find a way to get their music out. There's still a hunger and there's still a drive for independent artistry, for that independent voice, or for that difference in music. When people say that today's music sucks, now you know why. This is why I encourage people to always to go the independent route. When I hear people bashing, especially in CCM, they always talk about how much has been sold out to the big music industries and how they become no different than a secular artist. I always rant from the rooftops, go independent. Go on Spotify and hear of new artists that are pushing out their music. And I promise you this one thing. When you start doing that, genres like rock, real hip hop, and in the real Americana and independence, all that stuff will come out. When you have that kind of power, regardless of what the record companies can try to do, it won't stop. So that's my rant for today. Once again, if you like this video, do me a favor. Like it, share it to all your friends, and subscribe. And let's hope and see that we can be able to build up a community of music lovers and the music of music creators where we can be able to bypass the big machine and be able to become successful on our own terms. In the words of Frank Sinatra, I did it my way. Till next time, peace.